Okay, welcome everyone to our fourth installment of our Regional Transportation Plan webinar series hosted by the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. Today, our webinar topic is communities. So if you've been joining us through the webinar series, we've covered transit, trails, and technology, and communities is really where the three of those cross and intersect and get implemented on the ground and you see in Tahoe. So today we're going to really be focusing on how all of these concepts you've learned so far this month fit together and actually impact and change the transportation system at the lake. So looking at the agenda, we're going to have a short presentation from our speaker today, Melanie Sloan, who you may remember from last week, followed by a Q&A. As a reminder, everyone is muted, and if you would like to ask a question, please put it in the Q&A box on your Zoom. At the bottom, there's Q&A. There's also chat if you have questions, but please put all the questions in the Q&A. We do have several people that are answering questions live, and we'll save some of those questions for the end as well. And then, as always, we will be recording this presentation and sending out the slides and video link afterwards. So next, I'll introduce our speaker, Melanie Sloan. As a senior transportation planner for the TRPA, Melanie works closely with internal and external partners to develop and implement the vision of the Regional Transportation Plan. Melanie joined TRPA in 2019 and brings her experience of planning transportation in Colorado communities of Boulder and Adams County. So with that, I will let Melanie take it away.
Thank you, Devin. And thank you, everybody, for participating today. Communities, as Devin described, is a really interesting and important topic in our regional transportation plan. So I think we'll have a really good conversation in Q&A as well. Just to give an outline of my conversation with you today, I'm going to start with providing an overview of our Regional Transportation Plan, or RTP, for those of you who may not be familiar with it. And then I will talk about our vision for communities and the partners that help us achieve that vision. And then I'll talk a little bit about the framework. How do we go about developing the vision and identifying the proposed projects, which we'll review both short and long term, and then roll into Q&A. So as Devin said, questions may come up and you're more than welcome to put those in at any time through the Q&A button. So before we dive into communities, I just want to reiterate, Devin's is exactly right. Communities as a focus area in the RTP, it is really where everything comes together and more. So you'll hear, if you've been participating in our prior webinars, more of what was referenced in our transit, trails, and technology webinars. And I think you'll learn some more too. So with that said, how about we get started? So TRPA, in addition to being a regulatory agency in the region, is also a metropolitan planning organization, or MPO. And MPOs are charged with developing and maintaining regional transportation plans, or RTPs. And we do that for the entire Lake Tahoe Basin. So we do that every 4 years, and every time we do that, we look ahead 25 years. And when we're completed, that RTP outlines the vision for transportation in Tahoe. And it also defines strategies for implementation, and that's key because we want to achieve the vision. So if it has to do with transportation, it's in the RTP. And that's also important because projects in the RTP are also eligible for funding. So the RTP has 4 pillars, and the first 4 webinar series are those pillars as well: trails, transit, technology, and communities. You'll notice there's one focus area, that implementation piece, and I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end. So let's talk about our vision for communities. It's a big tent. Everything comes together, and as I said, there's a bit more. And the reason why that is so important is because, Tahoe's transportation system, it doesn't just move people. It works to restore and protect the environment, it strengthens the economy, and it revitalizes communities as well. More walkable, bikeable, and transit-connected town centers and recreation destinations, that improves access, it can spur economic development, it definitely makes for a healthier community, and it can ensure that residents, commuters, and visitors, and those with special needs, all have mobility options. So corridor plans or revitalization projects, a key element to achieving our community's vision, looks at improving road conditions and providing recreation opportunities, but really encouraging people to leave their cars at home. So the image here is a successful communities project recently implemented in Kings Beach. It pictures the roundabout that was installed, That's to help slow traffic in this town center. But it also added sidewalks and bike lanes, as well as bus pullouts. So you have that connectivity and mobility choices that we want to see through the vision. And that vision can't be achieved without our partners. And there are a lot of them, as this slide shows, from the development community all the way to the conservancies and departments of transportation and everyone in between. And they all work together to plan, fund, and implement sustainable transportation systems in Tahoe through coordinated land use as well as transportation strategies. So the framework for communities, there's a lot to it, but some of the fundamental pieces I'm going to focus on today, and that's complete streets. Those are streets that serve all travelers by extending beyond the roadway to include, for example, sidewalks or paths and amenities that encourage their use, like benches and landscaping and pedestrian lighting. Corridors are when we plan comprehensively and sensitively by focusing on the role of transportation in a specific area and understand what's needed there, then tailor projects and programs to meet those needs that serve visitors, residents, and commuters. Mobility hubs. If you've been participating in webinars, this isn't your first time hearing us talk about mobility hubs, but they're important to communities as well. That's because, yeah, they act as transit centers, they connect to our trail system. They also help by providing park and ride locations for a parking management strategy, as well as providing electric charging infrastructure. That's an important technology piece. Last is operations and maintenance, and it's not really the last in importance. This is the ongoing care and operation of all that we implement in our transportation system. It's truly about coordination. So that's between agencies, modes, users, priorities, and it's all meant to improve the flow of travel, but also goods movement, safety for everyone, connectivity, and resulting in economic vitality and quality of life. So let's talk a little bit about complete streets. This image is a rendering from the recently completed Sierra Boulevard Complete Streets project, which the city of South Lake Tahoe undertook. Now, why is this a good example? Well, it incorporates all of the elements that we want to see in complete streets. And knowing that streets make up to 80% of all public space in cities and towns across the nation, and that they serve both as activity, recreation, transportation, they serve business, we know they're multifaceted. And so we need to design and build them to represent that multifaceted role that they play in our community. So on Sierra Boulevard, what was done? Well, on-street bike lanes were added, a separated shared use path on one side of the road and sidewalks on the other. Attractive landscaping and pedestrian lighting really encourage people to try to move around in different ways, not just in the vehicle. But we also have water quality treatments and systems, so we have environmental benefits on these complete streets as well. Thinking to our corridors, well, corridor planning has a lot of goals, as this list shows, from transforming the roadway to serve more than just vehicles, but also to better manage the congestion of the vehicles that are on the roadway. It certainly focuses on improving safety and enriching the quality of life and experience of visitors and residents and commuters. And in Tahoe, we have identified 6 distinct corridors. So in the north and east, we have State Routes 89 and 28 in California. And the north, I'm sorry, I said north and east, that was north and west, I apologize. In the north and east, we have State Route 28 in Nevada. On the east, we have US 50 from Spooner Summit down to Lake Parkway. On the south, we have US 50 from Lake Parkway to almost the Y in South Lake Tahoe. And then at the Y and south into the town of Myers, we have another corridor. And last, we have State Route 89, the recreation corridor that is in the south and the west and includes a lot of those really popular recreation areas like Emerald Bay. You may be really familiar with the US 50 South Shore and the State Route 89 recreation corridor because both of those are undergoing planning processes right now. Each are about to wrap up, and you may have participated or received communications about those in the past. Mobility hubs. Okay, these again, that's because they're important links for vehicles, transit, and those walking and biking. And they're built with park and rides more and more, so helping us with our parking management strategy in the region. We also know that they should have connections to paths and trails, as well as implement electric charging infrastructure for our future transportation needs. In this picture, gorgeous, shows the Tahoe City Transit Center. It's a great example of a mobility hub, and one you can see in the bottom left of the image that is linked to Park and Ride. Not shown here is the Lake Tahoe Community College Park Mobility Hub. That is in South Lake Tahoe. It's another great example of mobility hubs, providing access to opportunity by being located at a college, as well as path connections to transit. And we have electric vehicle charging infrastructure there as well. Operations and maintenance. So 110 miles of highway, 619 miles of local streets. That's the backbone of our transportation system. They serve as main streets and regional corridors for those driving, taking transit, walking, or biking. We also have miles of shared use paths, and they provide more transportation options and more equitable access all year round. We have over 32 miles that are cleared of snow in the wintertime. And our data shows that these are vital connections too. And we have path users all year round seeking safe transportation and recreation, even in the winter. And an important component of that corridors planning I talked about is operations and maintenance. So those processes bring in champions and make sure that agreements are in place so that once implemented, operations and maintenance continues fluidly. So let's look at some of our proposed projects. In the near term, by 2025, we anticipate a few of these to be in place, or we anticipate these to be in place. One of the proposed projects is by the city of South Lake Tahoe. Now, this image shows the pilot project for what will be implemented this year, and that is shared use path and an on-street bike lane. That pilot was put in 2017 and has proven really successful. The city of South Lake Tahoe is proposing to continue bike lanes and sidewalks and transit stops and pedestrian lighting on Pioneer Trail in 2022. And then we expect Nevada Department of Transportation to complete its corridor plan for US 50 on the East Shore. And from that corridor slide, you might remember that's from Spooner Summit all the way down to State Line, Nevada at Lake Parkway. We also expect another mobility hub to be built, this one on the North Shore in Incline Village, possibly at the old elementary school. And that we know will have path connections, improve transit operations and amenities, but also be linked to Park and Ride, have electric charging infrastructure, and otherwise represent the mobility hub ideal that we've been talking about. Lastly, the Nevada Department of Transportation will be repaving roads, important operations and maintenance, State Route 28 in the north all the way to Mount Rose, as well as US 50 on the South Shore. But the RTP goes out 25 years. So by the end, by 2045, what are some proposed projects? Here's a few, and the project list has more, but we'll just highlight these from the community's focus area. We anticipate having another complete street project in South Lake Tahoe at the Y. You can anticipate pedestrian, bicycle, transit improvements, as well as water quality improvements. The state line to state line bikeway, we anticipate to be completed, and that's represented in the map on the right side, going from Crystal Bay all the way down to state line. The vision is to have a separated shared use path for people walking and biking all along that route. And this project is so large, of course, we would anticipate it to be completed in phases. And the first phase was completed, and that's from Incline Village to Sand Harbor. And I'm sure you're familiar with that because it's been so popular. It's likely many of you have taken a stroll or a ride along that section. The State Route 89 corridor, recreation corridor, will also be a big project and likely see implementation in phases by 2045 as well. So the vision that's being captured now in the planning process will start to take shape, and that's going to include shared use path as well as transit and other amenities along that really popular corridor. The South Shore Community Revitalization Project also will likely be implemented, and that project includes rerouting US 50, as well as affordable housing and neighborhood and community improvements, along with transportation improvements. And I'll talk about those a little bit more as we highlight the really excellent example of a communities project in the Main Street Management Program. And lastly, operations and maintenance funding for both state and local will continue to be advanced and dedicated. So looking at Main Street Management Plan, the big vision is to create a safer and more enjoyable destination for residents and visitors. And this is transportation focused. So I'm going to hone in on some of those. And one of the biggest pieces that the plan can achieve is by reducing vehicle miles traveled. Now, that's great. It has environmental benefits, but there's also a quality of life aspect to that congestion and providing more vital and more interesting and more modal solution. What does that mean? Well, that means we're going to expand the mix of uses there, having more and more interesting destinations. Also incorporating parking management, as well as transit improvements, including the number of transit stops and bus pullouts, but also an internal transit circulator. And if you walk or bike into the area and through the area, you'll have dedicated bike lanes as well as a multi-use path and wayfinding to help you move around. And as we talked about with a complete streets focus, it goes beyond just those transportation infrastructure improvements. So we anticipate having natural Tahoe landscaping throughout the corridor, expanding the aesthetic from that village to the whole entire corridor with building facade improvements and outdoor gathering areas, as well as shown in these images, the ability to use the space flexibly for events such as farmers markets. So that concludes my presentation on communities, and there's a lot there. So I do anticipate that you'll have some questions and we have some answers. Before we get there though, I wanna highlight the last webinar in our series, and that's next Monday, the 18th at noon, and it's on innovative transportation. That's a way to highlight our partners and how they are helping to achieve the vision of the RTP and to really celebrate some of the work they're doing. So if you are interested in that webinar, go to the RTP webpage. Again, that's trpa.org/RTP and click on the Get Involved link and you can register there. So with that, I'll roll into questions. Thank you for your attention.
Great, thank you, Melanie. We will now turn it to our question and answer panel. So if you do have any questions that came up, please type those in. I do have a couple that I'll start you off with, Melanie.
Okay.
How does TRPA and partners determine which streets are good candidates for complete street designs? And is every street in Tahoe going to become a complete street?
Well, certainly we want to consider all streets as being able to move all types of travelers. So, and to some extent, yes, but as to a formal complete street project, that is a great question. And it's really identifying those backbones, a term I used a bit earlier, that provide key connections and corridors. For example, the Tahoe Boulevard. That's a great connection between US 50, where we have a separated shared use path and a frequent transit corridor. And along Tahoe, we have a middle school, and further down, we have a community college. So, those are some of the considerations that are put into identifying and prioritizing which streets to advance for complete streets. Looking at the types of uses and the travel patterns and the needs where there might be important gaps to fill.
And then also related to complete streets, you all have talked about mobility hubs. Are mobility hubs one size fits all?
No, and that's a good question as well, because just like the corridor planning description, where you really want to look and be sensitive to what is needed in that area, you want to understand how that mobility hub might function in its place. Is, for example, a park and ride one of the key elements, because it may be acting like an intercept lot, something that can be used in the winter time to make connections to some of those popular winter or frankly even summer destinations. Some components are key. We want to make sure that people can get there not just by vehicle, but also on foot or bike, and that we're prepared for our future. So that electric charging infrastructure is really important, because we have a plan to implement a transit system that is environmentally friendly and running on electric vehicles in the future.
Okay, this question is, are there any proposed projects based on data within the corridors or other data to address the highest areas with high levels of fatality and serious crashes for pedestrians, bicyclists, and drivers?
Yeah, so that's a really important question, right? Safety of everyone in our community and those who visit us, that's really important. We have a few programs that monitor that information. For sure, we work in partnership with our state departments of transportation, so we're able to understand where those might be happening if they're on the state highway system, and then also with our local jurisdictions to understand there. At TRPA, we have a division that's research and analysis, and we have staff that are dedicated to collecting and analyzing data. And one of our key policies of our RTP is to do so for safety, to understand where there might be problems and where we need to put improvements. And we do that on an active basis.
Yeah, I would just add that in particular areas and specific projects, there's improvements to the intersection and entry to Round Hill Pines, which is a known area for high accidents. I think a lot of the areas along the east shore through Zephyr Shoals and that have incidents, and there's projects potentially to improve those. If you look at areas like Kings Beach and the roundabouts, that greatly improved pedestrian safety. Additionally, in Tahoe City, they are looking at making pedestrian safety improvements to the crossings. I know particularly at Grove Street is an issue. And then I think those complete street projects, like you mentioned, Sierra Boulevard and now Tahoe Boulevard, a primary driver of those is also safety.
Yeah,
How
those
is
are all
water?
great
Yeah.
examples.
How is water-based transportation factored and planned for into the regional transportation plan?
Yeah, so you may have heard in our transit webinar talk about ferry systems, and that is ferries and then also water taxis are part of the long-range vision for our transportation system and our transit system. And so one of the key components is understanding where those will come to shore and making sure we have connections, as we would talk about a mobility hub, for example, that also connects to those places where the taxis and ferries will come. TRPA recently completed its shoreline plan, and part of that is this emphasis on providing more and better connections to marinas and to where those ferries and taxis might be. So that's being rolled into the RTP as well.
You mentioned the East Shore Express, and this question was just about the Incline Middle School and if that was still being considered as a possible mobility hub.
I had said in my presentation the elementary school, but I may be wrong.
I think actually you are correct. It is the elementary school.
Okay.
That they were looking at.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Being so new, sometimes I think I know, but it's always great to have this team to help me validate. So I don't know if the middle school is still being considered as a candidate. I have heard and believe the elementary school is being considered. That's a TTD question. And if the person asking that question wants me to follow up, I can certainly do so with my colleagues and connect you with more information about that.
Great. And then for a lot of these complete street projects, how are they actually funded and who's the one building them?
Yeah, so in the case of the two that I showed in the city of South Lake Tahoe, both of those are being advanced by the city. But funds come through, as I mentioned, the RTP as well. So part of the process is working with our partners to understand which projects to be implemented to achieve the vision of our RTP, and then prioritizing those. And then there are applications for funding. There are also state funds and local funds that can be dedicated. So each project can be very unique. It depends on kind of, the mix the implementer has put together.
Great. Next question. When you looked at the corridors, you focused within the Tahoe Basin, and in some of the other webinars, we talked about sort of those connections to the nearby urban areas. Yeah. How does the communities part play a role in that travel to the greater region?
I'm really glad you asked that because in interest of time, I could have added a bit more information about a particular area of influence that is outside the Tahoe Basin, but that we are participating in and anticipate responding to. And that's the Resort Triangle Transportation Plan. That's being advanced by Placer County in the north, and it's connecting North Tahoe with Truckee. And there are connections between those communities for a variety of reasons. We have the ski resorts for sure and Truckee itself, and there's commuting and recreation. And so that RTTP, the Resort Triangle Transportation Plan, is one that we are participating in a planning element, and those that provide connections into the basin are being incorporated into the RTP. Now, there are other connections outside of that particular area, including transit routes that Kira mentioned down to the valley in Nevada, for example. And there's certainly a bigger vision over the longer term of the RTP to develop better and more transit options between the other communities that we connect with, like Sacramento, for example. So thinking about mobility hubs or complete streets, in both cases, when those regional connections come in, how do we incorporate those and connect those into our transportation system in Tahoe? Are they at mobility hubs or other forms? And when they get here, will they have the ability to continue to move around and enjoy Tahoe without their vehicle? Remember that leaving the vehicle at home, whether it's through improved transit connections at mobility hubs or having those really comfortable and encouraging bike lanes and shared use paths that are maintained year round, and recreation connections so that people can really fully experience and enjoy and have that wonderful quality of life while they're living here and while they're visiting here.
Yeah, so actually you just mentioned recreation connections. How
Mm-hmm.
does the regional transportation plan look at recreation and getting people to the outdoors?
Yeah, so, Devin, as he mentioned earlier, is ahead of sustainable recreation for the region as well. So I hope you'll fill in where I miss the gaps for sure. But, that East Shore state line to state line bikeway implementation is a really great example of sustainable recreation. So in the past, there really were no options for people to enjoy Sand Harbor unless it was by vehicle or riding on the road, which a lot of people weren't comfortable with because of parking on the road and those types of issues. So now there's a shared use path as well as the East Shore Express, a transit connection. So you can mix up the ways that you get to recreation. You can bike down or walk down, run down, you can take transit back or vice versa. So it's really this idea of still experiencing the best that Tahoe has to offer recreationally, but not having to use your vehicle to do so, and really having those options. So that's an example of the broader vision, and it's demonstrated in that particular location quite successfully, but we are certainly looking to expand that throughout the region.
Great. And then is there within the regional transportation plan, is there a priority on bike paths, transit, vehicles? Is there a ranked order, or bike paths and transit more important than vehicles? How does the regional transportation plan view those different travel modes?
Yeah, that's a great question because there are so many ways to travel. And as our transportation system evolves, both here and nationally, those choices continue to grow. Think about scooters, for example. They've really provided some transportation options in the South Shore. Kira demonstrated some of the data from that in her trails and transit discussions earlier in the webinar series. So we don't prioritize one mode over the other, but we recognize that there are opportunities to strengthen certain areas, like transit, for example. And we are very interested in making sure that we have a variety of modes available, as well as the ability to balance out the transportation system. And so that's why in this community's vision, we talk about complete streets, making sure that the roadway is serving all types of users, from transit riders to drivers to people walking and biking. And so it's really that approach in the RTP that we take overall as well.
Great. So that was all of the questions we've received so far. I'll allow anyone else another minute to type in any final questions. Otherwise, we can wrap up for today. And then do you want to just, I guess, just remind people that our next webinar, final webinar in the series, is next Monday, Innovative Transportation Solutions. And we will have a panel, our first panel for the series, and that will include the League to Save Lake Tahoe, Mountaineer, which is the microtransit service in Squaw Valley Alpine Meadows, Lime, which you know from Lime Scooters in South Lake Tahoe. So we're going to really be talking about that private-public partnerships and how innovative solutions get implemented on the ground. Seeing no more questions, we will end it for today. Thank you all for attending. We will be sending out video link after this presentation with the slides, and hopefully we'll see all of you next week.